You can own your land, you can pay off your solar panels, you can install a battery big enough to run your whole house. And in some parts of the United States, you can still get fined for refusing to stay connected to the power grid. That sounds impossible. This is supposed to be a free country on your own property, using your own power. So how can that be against the rules? To understand this, picture a fairly ordinary homeowner. She has watched her electric bill climb for years. She has read about solar panels and batteries getting cheaper. One day she decides she is done. She installs enough solar and storage to cover her entire home, tells the utility company she is disconnecting, and expects that to be the end of the story. For a lot of people, it is. In many counties across the country, especially in rural areas, this kind of full disconnection happens quietly, with no drama at all. But in other places, the story takes a strange turn. A code enforcement officer shows up. A letter arrives citing a violation, and the homeowner learns that the rule she broke was not about electricity at all. It was about a property maintenance code that most residents have never heard of. This actually happened. A woman in Cape Coral, Florida, disconnected from the city's power and water. She used solar panels for electricity and collected rainwater for her daily needs. She was not living in filth or danger. She had simply replaced one set of systems with another. The city disagreed. Officials pointed to a code that said an occupied home must have what it called adequate electricity and running water. A special magistrate eventually ruled that she was allowed to power her home with solar, as long as the city approved her setup. But she was still required to connect to the city's water system, even though she did not have to use it. Read that again slowly, because it is the whole mystery of this topic in one sentence. She could keep her solar panels. She could not avoid the water hookup. Even the city admitted she never had to actually use that connection once it was installed. The point was not the water itself. The point was the connection. So why would a city insist on a hookup nobody has to use? The answer starts with a piece of model code called the International Property Maintenance Code. Many cities across the country have adopted some version of it. It was written years ago to prevent homes from becoming unsafe or unsanitary. On paper, that sounds reasonable. Nobody wants neighborhoods full of homes without clean water or working power. But the code was written before rooftop solar, home batteries, and modern water filtration were common. It assumes that safe electricity and water can only come from one place, the city's own systems. When someone builds an alternative source that works just as well, the code often has no clear way to recognize it. So local officials fall back on the only definition they have, which is the traditional hookup. That is how a woman using working solar panels and clean rainwater ended up violating a law meant to protect people from unsafe housing. This is the first misunderstanding most people have about going off-grid. They assume the biggest obstacle is technology. Can solar panels really power a whole house? Can a battery really last through a cloudy week? Those are real questions, but they are not usually the ones that get people into legal trouble. The real friction shows up in paperwork written decades before the technology existed to make full independence possible, and it does not stop at property codes. There is a second layer that catches even more people by surprise, and it has nothing to do with safety at all. It has to do with money. In some states, if your home is close enough to an existing power line, often a few hundred feet, the utility company has the legal right to require a connection, even if you never plan to use a single watt from it. Some utilities charge a monthly fee for this, sometimes $20 to $50, just for the privilege of being connected to a service you are not using. It is sometimes called a standby fee. It exists because in the eyes of the utility, being available to serve your home costs money, whether you draw power or not. So the promise of paying $0 for electricity, the exact promise that draws so many people towards solar and batteries in the first place, quietly disappears the moment that fee shows up on the bill. At this point, you might expect the story to be about a small number of overly strict cities being unreasonable. But there is something bigger happening underneath all of this, and it has to do with why utility companies care so much in the first place. A well-known piece of research from the Rocky Mountain Institute looked closely at what happens as solar and battery prices keep falling, while electricity prices keep rising. Their conclusion was that in a growing number of places across the country, it becomes cheaper for a home to generate and store its own power than to keep paying the utility. And this moment arrives well within the normal lifespan of the power plants and power lines that utilities have already built and paid for. In parts of Hawaii, that point had already been reached. Here's why that matters so much to a utility. Their entire business model is built on selling electricity to a large group of customers who share the cost of maintaining poles, wires, and power plants. If a growing number of customers leave, the company still has the same equipment to maintain, but fewer people paying for it. To cover the cost, prices often have to rise for everyone still connected. Higher prices then make leaving the grid even more appealing to the next group of customers. Researchers have a specific name for this pattern. They call it the utility death spiral, because once it starts, it tends to feed on itself. This is the piece that most people never connect to their own electric bill. It is not simply that a utility company disapproves of solar panels. Utilities are facing a real, measurable financial pressure as more homes generate their own power. And when a business is losing customers to a cheaper alternative, it responds the way most businesses do. It looks for ways to slow that decline down. Sometimes that means adjusting the rules around who has to stay connected. Sometimes it means changing how much credit solar customers earn for the extra power they send back to the grid. That second point is not a guess. It has already happened, clearly and publicly, in California. For years, homeowners with solar panels could send unused electricity back into the grid and receive a credit close to the full retail price they would normally pay for electricity. It made solar an easy financial decision for a lot of families. Then California changed the formula. The new system credits exported electricity based on what the utility would have paid to get that same power from another source, which is usually far lower than the retail price. For many homeowners, that one policy change cut the value of their exported solar power by around 75%. Suddenly, the math behind going solar looked very different than it did the year before. None of this means solar and batteries stopped being useful. It means the ground underneath them keeps shifting, often in ways that have nothing to do with sunlight or technology, and everything to do with policy decisions made in offices far away from anyone's roof. There's a similar pattern with water. People are often surprised to learn that collecting rainwater is legal in every single state. That part is simple. What is not simple is what you are allowed to do with it once it lands in a barrel. Some states place limits on how much you can store, or require the water to come only from a rooftop, or restrict it in certain ways tied to old water rights laws written long before anyone imagined a modern rainwater system. Colorado is often mentioned as the strictest example, generally allowing collection but capping the amount and limiting its use to things like watering a garden. So the myth that catching rain is illegal in America is false, but the myth that there are no rules attached to it is just as misleading. There is one more layer to this that rarely comes up in conversations about going off-grid, and it has nothing to do with cities or utilities at all. It involves insurance and mortgages. In recent years, finding homeowners insurance for a fully self-powered property has become noticeably harder. Many insurance companies now want proof that a licensed electrician has certified the system, confirming it meets current electrical standards, before they will agree to cover the home. A do-it-yourself setup, even a perfectly functional one, can be treated as a fire risk simply because no professional signed off on it. And a home that cannot get insured often cannot get a mortgage either. So a homeowner can follow every local code correctly, satisfy the city, and still run into a wall built by a completely different industry, one that was never mentioned in any of the online guides about solar independence. Put all of these pieces together, and a clearer picture starts to form. Going off-grid is legal almost everywhere in this country. Nobody is secretly forbidding it on a national level, but the road to actually doing it successfully runs through a maze of local property codes, utility connection rules, standby fees, insurance requirements, and shifting compensation policies, all built by different institutions with different incentives, most of them established long before self-powered homes were common. That maze creates real consequences for someone who does not see it coming. A family might invest in solar and batteries expecting a certain payback period, only to find that a policy change like the one in California quietly stretches that timeline out by years. A homeowner might disconnect from city water, assuming that using an alternative source settles the matter, only to discover that the requirement was never really about water quality at all. It was about staying connected to a system that was never designed to let anyone fully leave. Here is the insight that changes how most people see this issue once they understand it. This is not really a story about electricity, or rainwater, or solar panels. It is a story about how deeply modern life is wired into shared infrastructure, and how slowly the rules around that infrastructure adjust when new options appear. Utility companies did not build this maze out of malice. They built parts of it to protect their revenue, the same way any business protects the way it makes money. Cities did not write outdated property codes to trap people. They wrote them decades ago to prevent unsafe living conditions, using the only tools available at the time. But the result, whether anyone intended it this way or not, is a system that makes true independence far harder to reach than the marketing around solar panels and off-grid living usually suggests. That does not mean full independence is impossible. People do it every year, in plenty of places across the country, without any conflict at all. What it means is that success depends less on the size of your battery and more on understanding the specific rules in your own city, county, and utility territory before you make any big decisions. The same plan that works easily in one county can lead to fines and legal trouble 2 counties over, simply because the paperwork is different. Knowing this before you start changes everything. It turns going off-grid from a leap of faith into a plan you can actually check, address, and prepare for in advance. If you're interested in exploring practical options for reducing your dependence on the grid, you'll find some helpful resources in the description.